Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Journey Through the Generations podcast. We appreciate you for listening. One thing I want to do before we get started is update everyone um, on ways you can listen to the podcast. One is through bumpers. That's Bumpers. You can download the app and you can subscribe to this podcast. And here in the near future, we'll have a Facebook page to where we can post a link and you can just listen to it through the link. And I was able to figure out how to upload to the Apple iTunes podcast. And so we are officially on iTunes as a podcast.
Yay!
And you can look for us there and subscribe, of course. And you'll be notified either through there or through bumpers if you subscribe when we do a new podcast. So that's certainly good news, and we're excited about that. So the thing that we're going to talk about today is a trip that we did back in 2014.
Seems like so long ago.
Yeah, to Chicago. And I guess I'll let Trisha tell what the trip was for, and then we can just talk about what we did.
Well, originally we went because one of my college friends was getting married. And of course, anytime we plan a trip anywhere, I always think, what can I do in that city to advance my research? And I decided that my great-grandfather lived the later years of his life in Chicago, and that's where he passed away, and that's where he was buried. So I thought it would be a good time to get his death certificate and find out where he was buried and visit the cemetery to take pictures of his headstone.
So we went to Chicago, which was a great trip. We had a really good time. Trisha was able to go to her friend's wedding. Hey, Mo. And I call her Stankin'. She stank. No,
Stop.
No, she doesn't. That's my friend. I've been knowing her a long time.
Stop that.
But we went to Chicago, and the first thing we did was we went to the Cook County Vital Records. Now, going to this place was, number one, it was kind of hard to find.
Yes.
Because it was in this huge building, and we had to park and find out where to go. And then they had security you had to go through. And the office was, I think, right down the hall from a court.
Yeah, it was in a government building.
Yeah, and so there were some people that was, little sketchy looking. But
and just a little background information. This was my first trip doing research out of Arkansas, was in Chicago.
Yeah, so it was kind of difficult, but once we found it, and I can follow signs and directions pretty good. Trisha not so much, but
no.
But I mean, we found it and we got in there, and she did her thing and got the information that we needed.
Yes, I requested a death certificate for my great-grandfather, and it only took like 15 minutes for me getting to the desk. I, of course, had to stand in line, but once I got up to the desk and talked to the lady and gave her the information, that I had already filled out the form and I had my money ready. So it only took 15 minutes from her to putting it in the name and everything for us to actually get the death certificate.
But if I remember right, didn't she have to go to like a different like book, or it wasn't electronic?
Yeah, it wasn't on the computer. She looked up in the computer and it wasn't, so she had to go back in the back and look for it because he died in 59.
Yeah.
And those records hadn't been, I guess, entered in the computer yet. So that's why it actually took longer than she said it probably would have if somebody had died in the 90s.
Yeah, so if you have to do it, it's really easy to do. And I was kind of nervous being in a big city like Chicago. I thought it was going to take forever, but I think it took us more time to
Get through
park and
security.
walk and get through security than it was to get it. So anyway, it was good, and they had the information on the death certificate about where he was buried
Correct.
because we didn't know that
Right.
beforehand, and realized that it was really close to Chicago, in a town called Alsop.
Yes.
I think it's pronounced Alsop.
Yes.
ALSIP, I think it is. And we had to drive out there, and I think we drove out that day,
We did.
and it was closed.
It was, and it had closed like 45 minutes before we got there.
Yeah. So luckily, we did that on our very first day.
Yes.
Our very first full day there, and so we were able to go back the next morning when they opened
Yeah.
to actually go find the headstone. So here's the part that I was worried about, and I'll just tell you from my point of view. I don't mind going to cemeteries.
I do.
But what I do mind is going to cemeteries that I'm not familiar with and that are out in the deep country, back up in the woods, like black folks tended to be buried back in the day.
Like where my grandparents are buried.
Yeah, in Newport.
Correct.
Right. So, or right outside
Yeah.
Newport. But anyway, I don't like that. Especially in a place where I'm not familiar with. I don't know who lived back there, who gonna come out with guns ablazing, and certain folks don't like people who look like us. So, that kind of thing worries me, especially down in the South and stuff. I know we weren't in the South, but I'm just saying that. So going to cemeteries, I just didn't know what to expect.
Right. And he did die in 1959. And of course, that was still segregated back then. So we knew this was going to probably more than likely be a black cemetery, which usually is not in the best area. Usually rural, backwoods, dirt roads. That's what I was anticipating.
Yeah. And so I was pleasantly surprised to see that it was right on the edge of a neighborhood. It was fenced. It had a gate and everything, so it was protected.
Yeah.
It was well kept,
Had an
and
office.
it had an office, and that's what I was.
With people in it.
Yes, that's what I was really happy about, because I thought we were gonna have to go, tramping through this whole cemetery trying to find a handful of people in a cemetery that has thousands of people in it.
It was huge.
And
it was a big cemetery.
Yeah, and so I was so glad to see that it was open, and there were people in there working
With computers.
that was able to look up online where he was buried, and the other people in your family as well were buried, and they were able to write down on a card and show us on a map where those people were buried.
So we were able to drive up to that section of the cemetery. I think it was like H or something like that. And
Yeah.
then we went to section H and basically walked around and looked for it. And that was a lot better than having to go from A to Z.
Yeah.
Or A to whatever the last letter of the cemetery is.
So up to this point, everything was going great.
Yes.
I was pleasantly surprised with everything. We didn't have any issues, other than it was closed when we got there the day before, but that's no big deal.
Yeah.
We just went the next morning. So, pleasantly surprised with everything. Then we get to the section, and we couldn't find the headstones. Now, the headstones were the ones that are flat
Right.
on the ground, the small rectangle ones, not the ones that sit on top of the
Right.
ground and
Vertical.
and they stand up. So it wasn't those, so it was the ones in the ground.
Right.
And the problem was that the marker that the cemetery had in that part of the cemetery was older, and you can kind of tell it was the oldest part of the cemetery. And so the marker was like under the ground, like under the grass,
Yeah.
and so it was hard to see. But after looking, I don't know what, maybe 30 minutes.
20, 30 minutes. We walked around looking, and we kept like, it has to be here. This is the section.
Yep.
And we were like, but it has to be here. But I said, we must be walking on it. And that's when you were like, well, maybe it has dirt or something over it.
Right. So I finally found one of them. No, two of them, because the two are buried right next to each other. I think
My grandfather's sister's Aunt Lil and my baby.
Right. And so I found one and knew that the other one was right next to it, because you said they were buried next to each other. So I knew that. And the problem with that was that the cemetery, it was nice and they kept everything up. Whoever mowed their yard, the grass, they did horrible job around the headstones.
Right. They let grass.
They get grass grow over the headstones, and it was hard to see. And so we had to clean off the headstones. Now, this was the other bad part.
When we say clean, we mean clean.
Yeah.
Like, with grass and mud and dirt.
Yeah, it was muddy.
We could see part of Aunt Leila's, and that's how we knew that was hers. And we literally had to get, like, I think we used a magazine from the car, and we scraped some of the mud and stuff off.
So we had a rental car, so we didn't have anything in the rental car. I think we had one bottle of water
that was halfway full.
Yeah, and I think we found some paper or something from the rental car place or something.
It was from somewhere we had been, like the aquarium or something. I got a pamphlet or something,
and we used that to clean it off as much as we could.
Yes, I was totally unprepared for this. I now have a cemetery checklist to take with me, but this visit I did not have that.
Yeah, so I just thought it was odd that the people who took care of the landscaping didn't do a better job at making sure that the headstones that are flat on the ground that they would weed eat or something around it to make them and so I don't know if that's a cemetery responsibility or if it's the family's responsibility. I have no idea. But all I know is I told Trisha, I was like, this is crappy, and you need to tell your mama and her family that they need to come out here and make sure that either the cemetery is doing a better job or that they do it. Somebody has to do it. And
I did.
And some of her family lives close, so they could easily just drive over there and do it. So anyway, I just didn't know. I just thought it was odd that it was covered like that, especially with a cemetery that was so kind of well kept.
And so, if you looked around
overall,
the other sections, I don't know if that one was maybe lower and maybe rain and stuff went down to that section, and maybe that's why it was a lot of mud and stuff down there. But there were other sections that had the flat headstones that you could see in that section too. So I don't know if that was just a bad area or what, but it was an adventure.
Yeah,
I will say that.
Yeah. So it worked out. I mean, luckily we had that bottle of water in the car, so we didn't have to go anywhere and get any cleaning supplies and go back and anything like that.
And I guess I could have maybe gone to the office later and asked the people in there about it being dirty, but by that time we had cleaned it off. I was excited about actually finding it and taking the pictures that I needed, so I didn't.
So I had a pretty nice camera, and we took pictures, so Trisha could have those for her scrapbook to have, and Wesley waited in the car the whole time, because it was hot that day, and this was
June.
And
I mean, this time in 2014.
Yeah.
It was in June.
And it was hot. I mean, it was hot that day,
June
and
20th.
and I'm walking around in a cemetery in my nice casual shoes,
Right.
sweating and trying to figure out what am I doing in the cemetery in my good clothes, you know.
Yes. And I was no help because I hate cemeteries. Because I
So
feel like I'm walking on people. And
Yeah.
it just creeps me out. So I really was not that much help for Philip. But we got through it and we found them and cleaned them off and took some really good pictures.
mhm.
So that was good. The
Yeah.
takeaway, I feel, is if you have information, even if it's in an area that you're not familiar with, take someone with you. Don't go alone. And look really hard.
Yeah, I would say be prepared for anything. Be prepared for having to clean, or take
Yeah.
some the garden shears or something,
Gloves.
some small cutting shears or something, just to prune the area. I mean, I wouldn't suggest taking a weed eater out there,
No,
but
no.
just
But
take
that's a good
something
idea.
out there to help just make it look better,
Yeah.
if just in case. I take some cleaning supplies, just like a brush or some kind
Toothbrush
of
or something like that. Scrub
yeah, kind of
brush.
scrub brush and water or something, just to clean. You just never know if it's
Yeah.
dirty. And I mean, this is your family. You want to.
Preserve
It's their
it.
their resting place, and you want it to look good. And
Yeah.
take some flowers, and that's what we should have done. I didn't think about
Yeah, I
that.
didn't think about that either.
I
We should have
just
taken
thought
some
about that. We're taking some flowers or something. But
Yeah.
if you do that, of course you gonna want your flowers to be in a nice place.
Right.
Just be prepared for that, and
Don't wear your good casual clothes.
yeah, don't worry.
And shoes.
Especially if you out in the country and you don't know where you're going,
Right.
what you're gonna be up against. But it worked out, and we got Trisha the information she needed and the pictures that she wanted. And we left and continued our
Vacation.
vacation, and it was
It was a really good trip. I
it was a
enjoyed
pretty
it.
good trip. Yeah,
I
it was.
enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah. So, and so we mentioned that Trisha went to her friend, our friend Monique's wedding, and so I'll just say happy anniversary
Happy anniversary.
to Monique and Drennan.
I think
so-
it's tomorrow, actually.
Is it?
It's either
No,
21st or 22nd.
I don't remember the exact date.
We got
Yeah.
there on the 19th.
That's all right. It's still all love. And we don't we don't get the date exactly right. So anyway, so cemeteries can be good, places for information. If you aren't, comfortable with cemeteries, take somebody with you who can either get over their fear or doesn't care and can
Yeah.
go, and to help you navigate and find what you need to do. And then it also inspired me, because the next time we went to Little Rock, I went to where my grandparents are buried, and went into pictures for us too, for where they're buried. And I know where they're buried, and so it was real easy.
We walked right up to it.
We went right to it, and it's in Little Rock, and it's in a fenced in
Yeah, it's a nice area.
a nice area, and they do a pretty good job. And so anyway, so
I
it's
will
good
say
to-
this. I read about this after we left Chicago, but cemetery records are very valuable. The records that are actually in the office. If I had thought about it or had researched a little bit more, I would have known to go in to look and ask for the insurance policy to see who filled out the paperwork, and that could have maybe given me some more information. And the cemetery record probably has like the funeral home records, and then I could have known where the funeral home was to go get some more information. So you can get a lot of information from funeral homes and cemetery records, since they had an office there with a computer and paperwork and stuff. I just assume that they have like additional records other than where they're buried. So if I had thought about that or knew more about cemetery records at the time, I may have been able to realize who else in my family was buried at that cemetery, because he was buried there, my grandfather was buried there, and two of his daughters. So I can only guess that additional family members are there, but I didn't think to go and ask if there were other members of the Hatchett family buried there. I guess I could still call them. I have the card.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a good trip, and we got everything we needed done out of it, and so I think we would just encourage you guys to, if you need to go to cemeteries to get information, go do it, and just be prepared for anything, especially if you're going to a place that you're not familiar with, or you're in a city that you aren't familiar with,
or if it was a death way long
time ago. Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. I know the last podcast we mentioned our son Wesley, and that we would introduce him to everyone who might be listening. So we'll introduce him tonight before we leave. Our son Wesley. Wesley, say hey.
Hey.
So,
what's up?
Wesley, how old are you?
I am 14 years old.
And what school do you go to? What grade are you in, and what school are you going to?
I am in
the fall?
I am in 9th grade. In the fall, I'm going to Bentonville West High School.
Cool. So this podcast is about Mom's genealogy project and kind of the things that we've done over the years. What you've been involved in a little bit of her projects.
Yes, I have.
What was like your most memorable thing that you've been involved with Mom's genealogy project?
I don't know if this has to do with her genealogy, but last time we had a family reunion, it was what were
the Wright
family reunion, and I had fun. I liked it.
That was the one in Memphis.
That was in Memphis.
It was in Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that was the first time I presented anything about my family tree to our family in a setting like that, in a banquet setting.
So that's good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Wesley recorded me.
Yeah. So, and there's an upcoming trip, family reunion, right?
Yes, the Hatchet family reunion, the end of this month, the weekend before the 4th of July in Atlanta.
And then next year, 2018, the next Wright family reunion is in Los Angeles, California.
That is correct.
Cool. So cool. So we'll have Wesley on the podcast from time to time, and I know he's chomping at the bit to get his own podcast, right?
Yes.
So that'll be coming soon. And we thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.
Remember to subscribe on Bumpers and on iTunes. You can subscribe there. You'll be automatically notified when we publish a new podcast. And leave a comment and let us know what you think about our podcast, if you like it, what you don't like, if you have any questions about genealogy or anything like that, leave a comment and Trisha will get back to you.
Yes, I will.
Or if the podcast needs improvement.
Or if we need some improvement, you can just hit us up in the comments. So thanks, y'all. Talk to y'all next time.